Racine Heritage Museum, and today I will be talking to you about fractional horsepower motors. So what does that mean? Well, basically these things that I have here in front of me are fractional horsepower motors. And what that means is motors that have less than 1 horsepower, so very small motors, which is actually a pretty amazing engineering feat if you really think about it. They're able to move very, very quickly without producing too much heat and still have a lot of power in a small package. So we're going to talk about how those came to be. In 1902, the first patent for a small electric motor was issued for home use, and we believe that that patent was given to Fred Oster. Fred Oster held a number of patents over time and is sort of thought as the father of the small motor. And so he developed a universal electric motor, which eventually was used in vacuum cleaners and many of the things that we have here that I'm going to talk about today. By 1920, the fractional horsepower motor industry was the 4th largest industry in Racine. There were 7 companies that developed small motors in Racine, and they employed a collective 1,130 employees and generated more than $4 million in revenue. So it's quite a large industry here in Racine. Now, Fred Oster grew up in Racine and worked in his father's millinery shop. And one of his jobs in the shop was to dust off the hats. So the hats would be for sale and he would have to keep them clean. He would notice that when he would use a regular feather duster, the dust would fly off the hat and then it would just settle right back on. And so he began to think about what he could develop that would solve this problem. And that's how we see a lot of inventions developed, because people took a look, they saw a problem, and they came up with a great solution. So he began to think about how he could take a motor and make it much smaller so that it could make a device that could be used to remove dust. And so he started thinking about that and working on that. Now, by 1907, he hired Lewis Hamilton and Chester Beach, and those are 2 names you've probably heard before. He hired Lewis Hamilton as a sales manager, even though he had no experience as a sales manager, and he hired Chester Beach as an electrical engineer. Now, Chester Beach had no formal training as an electrical engineer, but he turned out to be one of the brightest inventive minds in Racine history. He went on to develop a 7,500 RPM motor for use in things like drink mixers and eventually a portable vacuum cleaner. The first vacuum cleaners were very heavy, they were very difficult to move, and so yes, they would work to remove dust, but you wouldn't want to have to drag it around your house. So Chester Beach is credited with making things lighter and faster and more efficient. And so at one point, Fred Oster, when he started his company and hired Lewis Hamilton and Chester Beach, Fred didn't think that his name would be a good name for a company, so he actually paid Lewis Hamilton and Chester Beach for their names. And so the Hamilton Beach Company was actually owned by Fred Oster. However, by 1913, Hamilton and Beach left Oster to start their own company. And so there were a lot of lawsuits back and forth, especially over patents and names. But if you study the small motor industry in Racine, you're going to see a lot of people branching off from other people and people helping other people. So it's very connected history. And so they went off on their own way. But by 1922, Oster sold his business and moved to Florida. He actually bought the home right next door to William Horlick in Miami Beach. And he had many patents, including a malted milk shaker, which, speaking of William Horlick, Horlick initially had discouraged Oster from this drink mixer, but eventually changed his mind and had a contract with him to develop more of them. So we see with a lot of Racine history that everything is connected with the different industries. So I'm going to transition to John Oster. He was born in 1891 in Austria, and he came to the United States at the age of 15. First he moved to Chicago, and then by 1911 moved here to Racine. And he started out his career in partnership and working for many Racine industries. He worked for Mitchell, he worked for Hamilton and Beach, and he worked for Andis for a short period of time. But eventually he started making his own handheld clippers, like the ones that you saw with Chris and Allison the other day, the ones that you squeeze, which become very difficult for your hand to move after a while. I don't know if any of you have ever tried one of those. It's not easy. So he began to think about how he could use a small motor to make a clipper. And so by 1924, he formed his company. And during World War II, the Oster company formed, they made missile and precision instruments for aviation. And so all the companies in Racine helped out with the war effort in a lot of different ways. But when we hear the name Oster, we do think of the clippers, we think of the mixers. We don't usually think of things that would be used in warplanes, but that is what they did. And so his company was sold to Sunbeam in 1960. And so the bulk of the small motor industry happened between 1920 and 1960. So we have lots of different items here. These are all Oster products that I have here today. We have some hair dryers, we have some clippers. The other thing that these all have in common besides being Oster is these were all designed by Italian designer Alfonso Iannelli. And so they have very smooth, sleek lines. You can see kind of the space age sort of design technique, the blenders and the hand mixers. This is one of my favorites because of the color. This is a hand massager. So you would plug this in and you would put your hand in this part right here, and this would be to massage your hands. So when people were working with their hands all day and their hands were tired, they could come home at night and plug this in and put this on their hands. It's actually very, very heavy. So we have lots and lots of these things. We especially like the Alfonso Iannelli ones. We just recently had an exhibit in this space of Iannelli and some of his charcoal sketches. He did work for St. Patrick's Church. And so again, things are all tied together in Racine. So this is by no means an exhaustive discussion on all the small motors. Of course, we have Dremel, we have Insinkerator, many others, but I just wanted to give you a little glimpse of a couple of them. And we thank you for listening today. We hope that you can tune in next week. Chris and Allison will be back with some really cool Gorton tool artifacts, so you won't want to miss that. So thank you for watching today. Stay safe, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.